Hi, I'm JD, and welcome to an episode of Seen and Heard. This is a show where I will interview all different kinds of people living with all different kinds of disabilities and just getting them to share their lived experience so we can learn more about them. So today, our guest is Christi. And welcome, Christi.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Great. It's great to have you. Thanks for coming in. So I kind of just want to start with, how do you feel about the word disability?
To me, it doesn't have a lot of it doesn't carry a lot of emotional weight, partly because it's fairly new to my own experience. I think that in general, I don't like to define things by what they're not. And so if I were to pull it apart semantically, I would come up with something else. But it's the term that we use across the nation and for a variety of different ability levels. And so I'm coming to terms with it.
Yeah, I mean, for me too, I kind of feel the same way.
Yeah.
It's like something that helps you get a point across,
Right.
but beyond that, it don't really have much attachment
Yeah.
to it. Why don't you just kind of give us a little introduction about your disability or disabilities? I don't want to assume anything.
Yeah. So I have a condition called ehlers-danlos. It's one of many. There are 13 types, but they're actually just identifying types all the time of connective tissue disorders. It's a genetic condition. So I've had it since birth, but I only knew that I officially had a diagnosis about 5 years ago. It's something that I've dealt with my whole life, but the idea that this condition was the reason why I was having problems is still relatively new to me.
Do you mind kind of opening up a little bit about some of those side effects or problems that you experience?
Yeah. So as a kid, I was termed the klutz, mostly because I was always getting injured. I broke my left arm 3 times in elementary school. I was on crutches a ton. I constantly twisted ankles. I've lost count how many times I've gone into the ER for x-rays. It was just a thing that happened at least once or twice a year because my ligaments and actually all of my connective tissue is degenerating basically. But especially as a child, my ligaments were just too loose. And so one of the types of ehlers-danlos is called hypermobile type. It just means that your joints, the concept of double jointed. I had a lot of party tricks that I'm not supposed to do. So those joints are lax. And so there are things called dislocation. Obviously, people know what a dislocation is, but also subluxation, which means that something comes partly out. So there's a lot of popping and clicking in my joints. When that happens, you're more likely to have breaks because, you're unstable. But there's also the part of the condition is not really knowing where your body is in space. And so I would run into things. I'm covered in bruises, always, still am. But as a kid, especially, I started getting migraines at like 9 or 10 years old. They became pretty debilitating and kind of ebb and flow. And I'll say that I have one right now. So it makes it hard sometimes to form a complete sentence. But so I've had, chronic migraines. I have problems with my circulation. Healing is very hard. So if I get an injury, sometimes things don't heal properly. And so I have lots of scars all over my body. And as I've gotten older, things have just gotten harder with all of that. So I had to have spinal surgery a couple of years ago due to a herniated disc. And I have a torn ligament in my hip that won't ever heal, but I also can't have surgery on it. So sometimes that flares and it means that I can't really walk well. There are just a lot of little pieces that for so long were me going to a specialist. I'd go to a specialist for this issue or go to a specialist, go to a neurologist, go to an endocrinologist, went to a gastroenterologist, went to a rheumatologist, and they were all looking at these individual pieces because I had all these complaints. My heart rate would skyrocket to over 140 beats per minute anytime I stood up too fast, and sometimes I'd pass out. And that's called postural orthostatic tachycardia, which goes along with ehlers-danlos a lot. And so it's just at any given time, I may be in a lot of pain. I get muscle spasms frequently. I have part of it is this thing called cramp fasciculation, which I swear I thought they made up when they told me about it. But it just means that my nerves sometimes are firing when they shouldn't be. And so I'll just be sitting still and things are just twitching. I went like 2 months one time in my 20s where my eye twitched constantly. And so things are just not working the way they should. And so it can cause a lot of pain. It can cause me not being able to walk well or not be able to function on any particular day. And then other times I look totally fine. So this concept of a dynamic disability in that, on any given day, my symptoms can change. It's not a static presentation. Sometimes I'm on crutches. Sometimes I use a cane. Sometimes, I'm running a 5K. Not anymore. I used to. But, it's very dynamic.
That's interesting. I mean, I can definitely relate with like the subluxation. I have sublux shoulders, the spasms, the nerve stuff. It is definitely something to contend with.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said for having a disability, but then like aging with that disability to some degree, because you don't know what's what and what's being affected by what.
Yep.
So would you consider this, an acquired disability or something you just kind of learned that you've always had?
Yeah. So I think it kind of sits in between because it's not acquired. I was born with it. It's genetic.
Right.
And I've been having problems since I was young. I mean, I remember my first break. I was in like kindergarten. I went because I broke my hand. And so I've had it my whole life. But as the idea that it's a disability and that it is a thing that is part of my identity is acquired because I really just thought it was a fault before. And now I'm like, no, this is part of me. And it's okay to take claim of that as a disability and say, this is just how I am and I'm figuring out how to like move through the world with it.
So did that feel like empowering to you? Kind of like at least putting a label on it to give it some form and make it less amorphous maybe in your mind to you?
Yeah. I think empowering, validating definitely. The first big appointment I had with my geneticist, she spent 2 hours with me talking about like doing the evaluation, but then also talking about all the ways to kind of support the symptoms that I have. But just having her say, when you are exhausted in the middle of the day, that's not because you're lazy. It's because your body has used so much energy doing these other things that it's okay. Take a nap. And knowing that there was a term for this thing that has been bothering me for my entire life. And also that, so I don't know if I think some people can identify this, especially women, in the idea of going to a doctor and having your symptoms dismissed as either in your head or not that big of a deal. And that tends to happen to patients with ehlers-danlos. Actually, the Ehlers-Danlos Society mascot is a zebra based on the Occam's razor kind of philosophy or brain is not working. But the idea that, when you hear hoofbeats, you should assume it's a horse, not a zebra.
Right.
But with Ehlers-Danlos, it is a zebra. It is one of those rare diseases that, you're having these symptoms. It's not, we shouldn't dismiss them. They are part of this whole thing. And so the validation of saying, no, it's not in your head, or, you feel like this and it's not just something little that is going to go away. Yes, you do have a condition that is causing all of it was really, really, it really, I keep using the word validating, but it was like, it just took off all this pressure, this weight of decades of feeling like there was something out there that I couldn't figure out.
I think something that kind of ties in with that I don't think gets talked about a lot too is that I think there's a lot of guilt that comes with having a disability.
Yeah.
Like you feeling like you're not able to do something and that's somehow your fault.
Yeah.
And I think I see that in some of what you're saying right now. It's just this intense just guilt that comes with it, that when you receive that validation, it is a weight. It creates such a weight lifted off of you feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Guilt and a little bit and some shame too. As the kid who was constantly hurting themselves, like, having adults say, well, like, well, nobody else got hurt. Like, how is it that you are the only person who got all these injuries? I remember one softball season that I slid into home base and really terribly twisted my ankle. I got hit by a ball and broke my finger. And like none of the other girls were getting these kinds of injuries. Like, why was it me? And so I just felt like there was some default rather than there being an explanation. a lot of people who have ehlers-danlos get diagnosed when they're younger. But it actually is very common for the diagnosis to happen in your 30s and 40s, because that's when you're finally kind of putting it all together, and it takes getting one doctor to look at it. I actually found an article, read an article where somebody was describing their symptoms. I'm like, that sounds very familiar. And so I'm a librarian. I went to PubMed and looked up the condition, found the diagnostic criteria, printed it out, and took it to my doctor. I was like, this is it. This has to be it.
Yeah, it ticked all the boxes.
Yeah. And so, no longer feeling shameful for like all of this stuff, but rather like, no, I have an explanation.
I mean, it is just crazy too to just think that you would feel shame and guilt from something that you have no control over.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, for me, I think I have guilt that I maybe can say is justified in that, like, I injured myself, to some degree, whereas for you, you literally had no choice in the matter whatsoever. But I still see that shame, that guilt in people's eyes, like in the way they talk about certain things. And it's painful, it's painful to hear that, because, it should be something that's able to be talked about. It should be something that you could feel open about sharing and not hide behind a closed door and not feel like, oh man, like, this is the reason this happened. I don't want to tell anyone, but I'm just going to bottle it up and have to live with that.
Yeah.
I think it's great that you're here telling us about this.
I think a lot about little kid me. So in first grade, I went to the nurse's office a lot for stomach aches. I just felt sick all the time. And all the adults in my life said, oh, she just doesn't like school. She's nervous. She's anxious. I loved school. I'm like the biggest nerd ever. I loved school. I didn't feel good. And, looking back on all those moments of being dismissed, and I wish I could go back to that kid and say, nope, you don't feel good. We're going to figure out why and how to help you feel better. It is not your fault.
Can I ask you, like, was there any points where it felt like it really progressed heavily? Or was it almost like one of those things where it's like, you get a tan over the summer and other people notice, but you don't notice because,
Yeah, that's never me. I never get a tan over the summer. But no, I mean, for a long time, it did just progress slowly. There were clues. Like I broke my foot in Taekwondo as an adult, and doing something I shouldn't have broken myself for. But so they were like,
a cool story.
Right. It was fantastic. But there were these moments, but it really actually got bad in 2020, of course, like at the same time that the world was shutting down. So it made it very difficult. I was already having some back pain and it was around the same time that I got the diagnosis. And so I was like, okay, that's part of it, right? I've had back pain off and on since I was a teenager. But one night I rolled over and then I couldn't walk. So I had like 9 months of getting myself to the chiropractor twice a week, trying to figure out what was wrong. Finally ended up getting an MRI, and that I had a pretty significant herniated disc pushing on one of my nerves on one side, and then some broken connective tissue just kind of hanging out in there. And that was December 2020, and they were like, you have to have surgery. Like, if you ever want to be able to walk again, because I also was, not only was I in a lot of pain, I didn't have enough strength in my left leg because it was the way it was pressing on the nerve. And so I was, having a really hard time moving around, taking care of my kids. I couldn't walk the dog ever. I couldn't do the things that I normally did. And so very quickly went through the whole process to have surgery. And since then, I feel like I haven't really gotten back to who I was before. And that's hard because I was always very active. I've always been in sports. Even when I wasn't playing a sport, I was going to spin class, 3 times a week. And so the change in my ability level has been very difficult to accept, even though it's been a couple of years.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I mean, even for me, it's like when I first got injured, it's like, I'm going to get back to how I was. And then you slowly learn that that's just not a thing, that doesn't happen. You might transform in a way that gets you similar, maybe in some way, but it's never going to feel the same, especially like you just lived this experience.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to just go back to being how you were.
Right. Even just aside from like the ability level, it's like I now had this whole thing happen, and it has changed the trajectory of my life, and it's changed how my perspective on it. But it is, hard to say, okay, well, I'm not the same person that I was.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that this new person uses mobility aids because that's just the way it is.
I mean, speaking more of the psychology of it, like, do you notice certain things like anxiety could like exacerbate some of your symptoms? And
Oh, absolutely. And anxiety and stress, and lack of sleep. And, a totally separate issue is I have a child with high medical needs, complex medical needs. And so caring for them can put stress on my own system, but I can't really make a choice to not care for them. And so, not getting enough sleep can be enough to kind of like, derail my whole week. Or if I'm not paying enough attention to my own needs, like if there's a day I don't drink enough water, I have a water bottle with me at all times. Because dehydration is really terrible for me. I'll get a migraine, but I also am supposed to have like a gallon of water a day and extra salt to make sure that my heart is able to do the things it needs to do. And so when I get stressed, I tend to forget about some of those things. I'm not as good about the maintenance part. I'm not as good at like getting myself out to go for a walk. We have a thing that we've been saying in our family the last few weeks is that movement is medicine. And it sounds counterintuitive, but I need to move my body. I need to do the exercises, do the PT stuff in order to feel better, even if it's a day that I don't feel like I can move.
And how do you feel kind of like now with like in relation to your disability versus like when you were first kind of like figuring it out and learning about it? Like, have you become more comfortable with it, come to terms with it more?
I've kind of had to be. I think in a similar way, we both are now on, the Accessibility Commission, and it has put us in a place where we're talking about it more. It had shared with some friends and family, obviously, but I'd never spoken on camera in a meeting, it's publicly about my condition as a disability. And so there's some level of it still feeling a little bit like an imposter. Like I don't want to take up space in the disability community that might be reserved for somebody else. And then I think that's not how it works. It's not, the whole like it's not pie. There isn't a finite amount of space in the disability community. The reality is, the numbers are a little skewed, not skewed, but can go back and forth. But like either 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 people have a disability at the moment. But almost everybody's going to experience some sort of disabling event in their lifetime. And so I feel lucky to be able to talk about this now and to be able to share that my experience, and to be able to talk about disability in our community so that we can help make it easier for other people, whether they have an acquired disability or they've a congenital one. And then also talk about accessibility and how can we make our community more accessible for other people.
Speaking of other people, how do you feel like you're seen by other people?
I think most of the time, most people don't even know I have a disability. And so I think that there are and this may be more in my own head, but like I sometimes worry that like if it's a day that I'm showing up with a cane, that I may be seen as like, oh, she's faking it, right? So I had this moment during the lockdown when I had to go to Target, and they had the early morning hours for people, seniors and people with disabilities who needed to be in the space without a lot of people. So I showed up, and the person at the front door told me to go away.
Really?
Yeah. Where they basically were like, this time is reserved for people with disabilities. And I'm like, but I have a disability. Like my doctor told me I cannot get COVID. Which I have at this point, unfortunately. But, they didn't look at me and see me as somebody who had a disability. And And so I walk around with kind of like a costume to some extent, because you can't see the pain. You can't tell that I'm in the middle of a spasm, or, that this morning I couldn't get out of bed for the first 10 minutes I was awake because I couldn't move. Those things are not visible, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a disability or that there isn't something that keeps me from doing what I need or want to be able to do that day.
Do you mind if we do a little body inventory?
Sure.
Just kind of like talk about kind of how you're feeling right now in this moment.
Sure. I have a really, really stabbing pain right back here right now, from the migraine. My lower back is sore. Before I got here, my hands cramped up. That's when my fingers will get stuck in positions. It's not right now, but it's still kind of feeling like that. And my knee hurts. I realized this weekend, every time I was doing some deep cleaning, and every time I'd get down low, my knee popped out of position.
Ooh.
And so it's just still achy from that.
Do you notice changes in the weather can
Absolutely
affect that?
Yeah.
Same for me.
Yeah. And I just realized my foot is vibrating. Super fun.
Well, no, it's important for people to hear this stuff, and we happen to pick a day where we got some crazy downpour that's affecting both of us.
Yeah. I woke up at 4 this morning with the migraine, and so when my alarm went off, I asked my husband if he could get up and do the morning kid routine and the dog and everything, because I just couldn't do it. And I didn't. I have a rescue medication that I usually take, but it was too late to take it, so I just kind of have to ride it out. And then when I looked at the weather, I'm like, oh, there's a thunderstorm. Yep, that's why.
So I just wanted to ask you one last thing. I want to know kind of, how do you feel about yourself now that you've kind of stepped into the disability community and out of the mystery of what it all is,
I'm not sure that I feel very different about myself, but I feel that I have this kind of, I don't know if calling is the right term, but I feel that I have this opportunity to help other people like me, but also anybody in the disability community, that I have enough functionality that I can be on a commission and do that work, that I have the capacity to do that. And so I'm grateful to some extent for that. And I think it also helps me. I mean, this is true for any kind of things when you're doing stuff that's altruistic, but it also makes me feel better about myself.
Absolutely.
And so that I can do something, productive with what I've been given.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there is some warmth, you learned about warm fuzzies,
Yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah.
You get a little bit of those, at least I feel like I do, just educating people.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important for us to take that role, not necessarily as forward as you and I are with the committee and everything, but just being okay answering questions when people have them, because that's how we learn,
Absolutely.
I think maliciousness can come from just ignorance and fear of the unknown,
Yeah. I mean, it is a little weird. I'm not used to talking about myself this much,
Right.
I'm the type of person, if you ask me a question, I'll answer, but then I always deflect back. But I think it is important to have those conversations. I know specifically with the ehlers-danlos community, everybody's trying to speak up more. It is a rare disorder that doesn't get enough research. And so the more that people know about it, the better it is for everybody who has it. And so it's an opportunity.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for being on here. It means a lot to me. And is there anything else you wanted to share, or anything I might have, misspoke about?
No. I mean, the only thing I think of is from the perspective of this show is that if anybody's watching it wants to be interviewed or wants to share, that's an opportunity. And I hope that they do.
Thank you so much. This has been another episode of Seen and Heard. So if you want to reach out to us to be on the show, we would love that. I will provide credentials at the bottom that you can reach out to me on. Otherwise, we're just going to keep pumping, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much.